Apologize for my tardiness, was dealing with some leadership issues. We have a brief voting session. The floor is not going to be till 11 now, so everybody's got a little time. A little bit. I don't know where our vice chair is. I'll bring him out on the floor. So we'll start with the first bill, which is House Bill 1526.
Mr. Chair.
Matt, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now you're going to be voting on House Bill 1526. I want to be clear, though, that what you're voting on now is both Port Act bills, House Bill 1526 and 1188. 1188 is in rules, but you're making it the same as the House bill. Once rules lets that bill out, you'll see it on the floor this upcoming session. So what you have in front of you is a reprint. You also have the executive order, just in case we need to go ahead and reference that as well. The reprint is to Senate Bill 1188. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through the amendments via the reprint. It's probably the easiest way to do it at this point. And I'll go page by page. As always, the Senate amendments are in regular underlined text, and the House amendments are going to be in italicized underlined text. And I'm going to try and point those out as best I can. So if you can, please let me try and get through the whole bill. I think there's a lot like towards the end that are going to answer a lot of questions that you all may have. So we can begin actually on page 3. Staff should have put actual numbers on each bill. So use the one at the very bottom center of the page. So on page 3, you'll see the preamble to the bill. You'll notice that the Senate had clarified that we're addressing reduced operations at the port and not just full closure. So then you can move on to page 4. So beginning on page 4 and ending at line 20 on page 7, that's where you'll see the amendment put on in the Senate, adding the Fallen Transportation Workers Scholarship Program. So the program is meant to provide scholarships to children, stepchildren, and surviving spouses of transportation workers who lost their lives in the course of their job. The House amendments on page 4 in line 9 limit the program look back to January 1st, 2022. It is in perpetuity, I will say. The House amendments on page 5, lines 1 through 22, are clarifying and also remove a state residency requirement for the scholarship recipient. Moving on to page 7, after line 21, you'll find a House amendment that prohibits an employer's earned rating record from getting dinged by labor if a layoff was the result of reduced operations at the port to help out the businesses. Sure. On the top of page 9, sorry, the reprint has very little on certain pages. On the top of page 9, you'll see that the Senate added an amendment authorizing the Secretary of Labor to exempt individuals from seeking work from the work search requirement, as many of these layoffs are temporary. The House altered the provision to ensure that it lasts past the state of emergency, so that there still could be reduced operations that occur after the state of emergency technically ends. This is only tied to port workers. At the bottom of page 9 to the top of page 10, you'll see a Senate amendment that exempts from taxes payments through the benefits program established by the bill. We did similar things during the Relief Act, where, if we're giving out a state benefit, a state grant kind of like this to individuals, we also don't want to tax it. After line 5 on page 10, you'll see a series of House amendments. The addition of 10208 is in there to ensure that individuals are not getting taxed on scholarship monies that they receive via the scholarship program. This is just a little belts and suspenders provision. The provision there you'll see in 13203 allows the sharing of tax information to help administer the grant program, and to also it's going to help for audits, so that if there are any fraudulent claims or anything that are going on, that information can be shared. Beginning at the bottom of page 10 and ending on page 12 in line 23, you'll see a Senate amendment authorizing Transportation Authority bonding to increase to $4 billion. This was a Senate amendment. Moving on, beginning at the bottom of page 12, you'll see this is where the assistance programs themselves begin in section 2 there in line 26. As amended by the Senate, the programs are meant to provide assistance to individuals who regularly perform work at the port but no longer can, and also provide assistance to small business, trade associations, labor unions, and certain companies with funds to, among other things, avoid layoffs. The House adds a number of amendments over the following pages. I won't point to every single one, but I'm just going to summarize what those House amendments are meant to do. They're riffing off of what you all heard at the hearing and the questions that the chair and other members asked. So first, an individual must be a Maryland-based worker. An individual may receive a supplement through the program if the UI benefit is low. Payments received under this program don't factor into an individual's UI calculation. A business must have its principal operations located in the state, or if not, they use the funds to support its Maryland-based workforce and operations. We're clarifying that labor unions count as recipients under the bill. We had trade associations in there. That was longshoremen, just another belt and suspenders thing on while they do their sharing model. We provide that the Department of Labor must incorporate the work sharing insurance program into the program to the extent applicable or practicable, excuse me. We specify and require that federal funds must first be used to fund the program before state funds can be used. So we're not doing kind of a first in, first out. As budget amendments get processed for rainy day funds, we're saying you receive federal funds, go ahead and exhaust those federal funds before moving along using state funds. Then finally, we provide that unless an entity qualifies as a small business, labor union, or trade association, federal funds can only be used for the worker retention grant programs. We don't want large companies or others to come in and act as a pass-through of state funds. There are federal funds that come in with strings attached for that to be used for, fine, but state funds, that's a no. You'll find Senate amendments with House tweaks on pages 15 through 16, requiring Labor and Commerce to establish a structure of the program, as well as requirements regarding the filing of insurance and subrogation claims and the clawback of any misused money. You have House amendments on page 16 in line 24. You'll see they ensure that rainy day funds can only be used to draw down in $25 million increments. So as you know, the House budget in conference authorized up to $275 million to be transferred from the rainy day fund to do this. You look at your executive order that's on your desk, you can see in there that there's a lot of money, existing funds that's going on in there, but they draw down on 25 million in rainy day funds. We're just saying that it has to be drawn down in $25 million tranches. The House amendments beginning in line 36 on page 16 through page 17 add detailed monthly reporting and accounting requirements for how funds are spent. The Legislative Policy Committee will have oversight and may call hearings at any time to discuss reports and any of the findings that are done in any of these actual progress reports. Then finally on page 18, you'll see House amendments that require the departments to draw down on existing revenue sources before going to the rainy day fund, and require any unspent rainy day monies revert back to the rainy day fund. And also you'll see one that just encourages the Attorney General to pursue all options to recover damages as a result of the disaster. Those are generally the House and Senate amendments, with a highlight on the Senate amendments. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Our colleagues, we took a lot. You heard your amendment. You know, I apologize for the misinformation. I didn't know we could do that until I found out we could. Tried to listen to as many of the colleagues as I could and get as many amendments as I could. So I know we're getting ready to move the amendments, but Steve, you want to ask a question now?
Of this bill, of this. And what does full and reduced operation? Help me with that.
So,
turn mine off.
oh, there we go.
I'm working.
We were competing.
What the bill says, till reduced operations. What does that mean?
So I think that's gonna have to be defined a little bit by the department. The MDOL and Commerce and everybody are gonna go together and put together the restrictions of the program. Reduced operations could mean anything, just like traffic hasn't returned and everything. So the state of emergency, it's my understanding, could sort of end, right? Because channels are opening back up, but it takes a while for the cargo and everything to start building back that balance.
When you say reduced operations, do you mean, because the port probably won't come back to full operations till after a bridge is built? Is this is this thinking that it's going to take till the bridge is done?
So this program requires, you'll see on page, is it 12? Give me 1 second, and I can actually point you to that. It's actually page 15 of the reprint. So this program kind of is, the idea is that it's going to sunset really at the end of this next fiscal year. So you're going to have a chance to come back, and if it needs to be re-upped because operations are still too reduced or we need to redefine it, you're going to get a second bite at the apple next year. Page 15, lines 12 and 13, funds have to be distributed on or before June 30th, 2025. So these funds are meant to be for a limited amount of time. And in any event, the budget amendment authority that we gave was, we can't go in future years with budget amendment authority. So that moving money around and everything is occurring in the budget that was just approved by the general.
Who makes the decision on what reduced operations is or isn't when we're back? Who makes that?
When we're back?
When the port's back to where this bill is deeming acceptable?
That would have to be a conversation at the level of the administration, but the legislature through the Legislative Policy Committee is going to have constant contact. The idea is going to have monthly reporting on this and to call meetings to try and understand exactly where we're at. So that's going to kind of, since we are sort of in an unprecedented situation, trying to do too many belts and suspenders and plan for every eventuality, we sat down and kind of rolled through this and figured that that was something that had to be left up to the determination at a time and place.
And Steve, I just want to say, so we obviously ran through several scenarios, like 85%, 75%, but we realized that not knowing enough about how the port even works is why we're going to have the LPC being involved monthly to determine when they've asked for too much, when we stretched out more than we need to, because about the bridge being built, no, we're more worried about port traffic, not that it takes you an extra hour to get to work. So we're not using that as part of the slowdown, but just in case they do, we will be there to kind of build, this was trying to put as many guardrails around this process as possible. We couldn't come up with anything with specificity that would give us the proper tone and, as far as when this ends, because it is loose. It's beyond when the state of emergency ends, but we know that it's going to take a while for these businesses to shift their routes back, getting back through the port. So that's why we're having the monthly reports, and we can call briefings whenever we need to, so we can be a part of that determining factor.
My biggest concern is when somebody moves out of here, they may never come back, and I don't want to see this tied in perpetuity.
Well,
Mr. Chair.
Without a doubt, go ahead.
Yeah, part of the program is that labor, I mean, there is some commitment to actually returning to the port to receive
For anybody
these
receiving
funds
these benefits.
in the
But for those that don't
itself.
come back, there's no question that we may not be back at that, like you said, 100%. We're not tying it to the past. We're saying basically we've done all we can do. What it is. That's why we have the LPC being involved to determine if they want to do their $25 million increments, they got to come back through and ask for permission again to get the next. So there is no in perpetuity. In fact, like I said, it ends definitively next June.
Okay, one more, and this is kind of touchy and sensitive, but the scholarship program and that fund, I guess I got some calls because we've lost some troopers and stuff in my district, and we're doing this now, and we've been looking for something like this maybe forever. I guess I question maybe that should be a separate bill or separate something we actually look at. Why is it included in this bill?
Sorry, my mic went off again. I can't remember if this was an administration amendment or if this was just a Senate amendment. It was an administration amendment. Yeah, it was an administration amendment to add to the bill right now. So this is just a port-based bill, given the unprecedented event that it is.
I get that, but you know what we're doing is we're kind of dismissing what's happened to a lot of people in the past, that we're doing a job, doing a duty, doing whatever. And now all of a sudden we have an accident. It's a terrible tragedy. Nobody questioned that. But now we're putting together this fund for this purpose. And I would think that I would like to see bigger and longer discussions on this because we haven't done it in the past and I've been hit with a lot of questions about it. You know, people sitting back say, why now? Why didn't they do it for me?
I don't really have an answer. Like I said, it is part of the port bill. This was, I mean, yeah, I don't have an answer to that.
It's tragic, but I mean, if you think about it, we've had shootings, we've had whatever, but we've not done something to this magnitude, and now we're doing it. And I don't know if it's the right place for this in this bill. This bill is to take care of business at this point. We all sympathize with the employers. There's already funding and funds coming up for this type of thing. And I think people are more than willing to contribute to something like that.
Okay. I think Delegate Adams.
Okay, so
Wait, I
there-
apologize. Did you have a response?
I did have a.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry, because I think his response to Delegate Aaron's. Go ahead.
Delegate, I totally understand your question. I know that there are many law enforcement jurisdictions around the state that already provide this. When an officer is killed in the line of duty, they provide education for the children. I don't know if the Maryland State Police does or not, but there are a lot of jurisdictions throughout the state that already do it. They've been doing it for, you know, a long time.
And
I just wanted to add that. little piece,
Just
that's all.
recently, though, we saw several people get killed because road rage, and we didn't do something for that. And I'm thinking, no, people, I'm talking about scholarship in general. We saw workers.
Maryland Victims Crime Fund and things of that nature. And I'm not disputing what you're
Again,
saying,
if we have that, why are we including it in this?
because this isn't crimes of a crime victims fund. This isn't a crime. This was not something done intentional. This is something done intentional. So that's that.
It includes more than what this tragedy did.
I'm sorry.
It includes more than the bridge people that got killed in the bridge.
You talk about this does now. Yes. Yeah, it's for people who, again, are, working our roadways and get struck and killed. It's for their families.
To my point, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, we just lost several people in a road rage accident, and we did not react to that like this. That was a horrible, horrific.
Without going into further detail, I understand where you're going. If
Okay.
that's what you're saying, I get it.
All
I can't comment on it, but I get it.
Thank you.
Delegate Adams.
thank you, Chair. So just two questions, and it should be pretty brief, but the first one has to do with the bonding limit. Do we currently, I mean, so is it 4 billion on top of, or is this can you tell me where we are currently with how we use tax or toll revenues?
It's the cap of 4 billion right now.
Okay,
So-
so would it be factual that we already have some bonding out and so this is whatever it currently is, it can't go more than 4 billion in total of all bond?
Correct.
Okay.
And per their the bond instruments and everything else, they'll have to look at their ratios and everything and determine how much they can afford to bond up to that cap.
And is that money aimed at the bridge being rebuilt? I mean, help me understand where we might, give me one or two examples of what that bond money might be used for.
Sure. So the Transportation Authority kind of pulls its bond money. So I mean, other projects like the Key Bridge go to support others. There are others obviously that are more profitable than others. So it's kind of a pooled resources there. But the bond raise was asked to do specifically in response to this.
Because basically there's more expenditure to keep by the state, and although we look for the part of the state, that being said,
Okay.
a lot of stuff to go through, so we have to finally get that money to get the bridge built, and hopefully.
All right. So my only other question, thank you.
They're still going to be tied to the spending ratios, though. That does not change that. We don't.
So when you say 25, or when you say $25 million in tranches, is this, help me understand the concept of a tranche? I mean, they could come in today and say 25, tomorrow 25, and or
So the tranches don't, when I was saying tranches, I wasn't using it in bonding terminology. So the raising the cap to $4 billion is not a part of that. When I was talking about, the $25
The rainy day
million,
fund.
yes. When I was talking about the $25 million drawdown, I was saying that with what you all did in the budget, there was up to 275 million can be drawn down on from the rainy day fund. In order to draw that down, budget amendments have to be processed. So the administration has to submit to the House and Senate and say, we are doing this with this money, and this is what we're going to do with that money. That's generally how the budget process works, a very high level view.
Yeah.
So we're saying that instead of Oh, well, you can go ahead and take the whole 275 million and put it into like a port account. We're saying you can only write a check at $25 million at a time until you hit that cap of $275 million. It's a leveled approach.
Be spending it, excuse me, you've got to be spending the money. You can't, like you said, you can't just draw it all down now and let's see what we can do with it. You have to be spending the money before, and and before you write that next check. You have to expend that first 25 million versus taking it all now and putting, like you said, into a special account and drawing down. You don't have to take it. There's no need to take $275 million out of the rainy day fund unless you actually need it. You understand? So it's not.
Well, I'm done with my questions, but I assume $25 million relates somewhat to the idea that there are going to be somewhat limited requirements for money and that it may happen over a period of months, but you're not expecting any individual appropriation being more than 25 million. So
That's fair. And we pulled the $25 million limit from the executive order that was done. They requested 25 there. So we said only in 25 million.
That's my question.
Look at Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify on the scholarships. So the scholarships are going to be provided to the 6 workers that perished on that during that accident, but we are also including other road workers or other workers going back to, I think you said 2022.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And is this going on forever?
Oh, yes. Because it's been instances of individuals, low wage workers working on the roads to support their families. And at the end of the day, they said, and if something happens to them, we want to be able to ensure that as long as they're going to a Maryland school, that these individuals, their families can still survive somehow, some way.
Okay. And then I guess you kind of covered the reduced operations, and that's going to be a judgment by the governor's office, correct? When things are back to
Right.
a
Correct. But
reasonable.
in
that-
tandem with the LPC, because we will be obviously in discussions like, okay, well, when, why we're not done yet, hearing the rationale.
Okay. I had another question. Okay, so the scholarships, how is that gonna work? Who is going to, so it's 5 years for full-time, 8 years part-time. So who is going to administer the program?
I believe the Maryland Higher Education Commission administers the program.
Okay. What happens overall if the federal government, I think you said that if they come in and say, we're gonna build this bridge, they're gonna give us, what, $4 million or $4 billion. What happens then?
To the money that we've already spent? Or are you, because here's the thing, in reality, there's no way we're getting this money. We're gonna have to start the project without them. I mean, they can't vote anything. This would be an appropriations, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that's just going to have to be a time and place decision on what the funding split is between state and federal funds. We're not sure exactly of how it's going to come, when it's going to come.
So I think the question may be asking is, if they give us the money after we've already spent it, does it go back to the rainy day fund? Is that what you're asking?
If it's on the bridge and it's an MDTA out of that $4 billion cap that Doug and Adams and I were just discussing, then no, we wouldn't be going back to the rainy day
This
fund.
isn't being taken out of the rainy day fund. We raised the cap to $4 billion for the Maryland Department of Transportation, so they can bond an additional, the additional money. And so it would not go back to the rainy day fund because it was never taken from the rainy day fund.
It's only the money, that 275 million for the individual and business support programs, that the clawback would apply and go back to the rainy day fund. So those ancillary kind of items, subrogation claims, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And this might be the same answer about when will the state of emergency end? That's going to be determined by the governor, and that's going to be determined about when some individual decides there's enough shipping and business that has resumed.
That's my understanding. That'll be decided then.
Okay. Who is going to be in charge of the detection and prevention of the fraud and fraudulent use of funds?
I believe that's going to be through
Commerce
Labor and Commerce have to do agreements with these entities. They're going to be looking at it as well. The comptroller's requested already information tax sharing authority there in order to do this. So there's already been some talk about how that's going to work amongst all the administration and even the comptroller's office.
Okay, that's as far as I've gotten in my reading, so that'll be the end of me for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Pippy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously appreciate having everybody here today on this important issue. Can we just walk through the payments and the pay for the couple different purposes that we want to cover, right? One, I mean, looking at the preamble of the bill, there's $3.3 billion in annual income for people either working directly at or partially related to the port. There's somewhat of a cessation of work that's happening now because the instance. And so we talked about the $25 million increments in payment. I would imagine 25 million is not going to cut it, right? You had mentioned that it made it seem as if you'd have to each request could be 25 million. So
Yes.
for example, if you wanted 500 million to, let's say, try to mitigate the income loss for these workers, would you have to come to the Legislative Policy Committee 20 times to 20 separate times to get that? Or do you envision a scenario in which someone could come in and say, we want 20 tranches or 20 increments at once? We may vote 20 different times, but is that like at once? Can you walk us through that? And then also the $1 billion raise on the bonding authority. I mean, I get that's probably for the building of the bridge.
Correct.
But we got two separate goals, right? One is to mitigate the immediate income work related to income for small businesses and workers and all that. And then the second part is probably a little bit more long-term, which is the rebuilding of the bridge. But I would imagine one is probably more pressing than the other at the moment. So can we just slow it down a little bit and go through how this would work starting today, assuming this bill passes, with the payments for the workers, the businesses, and then the rebuilding of the bridge?
Sure. So we'll start with the drawdown of rainy day funds. I think I can't tell you exactly how it's going to work because, Commerce and Labor already have their stuff that's already in there. There are some programs that can be used. So outside of that, we're talking about the rainy day fund and the $25 million drawdowns. Mm-hmm. The idea and how budget amendments generally work is, yes, you would have to process separate budget amendments in the amount of $25 million each. I don't see a scenario after talking with a lot of folks about how you would have, they would come with all of them all at one time, but they would all be reviewed independently of one another.
And when would that occur? Like now?
When would that occur?
Yeah. So I mean, we got workers that are out now. So how does the money get to them now?
So the money would flow through the departments. We just have to, the budget amendment is just the mechanism that sort of unlocks that money out of the rainy day fund to be used by Labor and Commerce to funnel the money to those affected by the port disaster.
And that's the 275 million?
Correct.
So right now, man, that's why I went to law school, so I don't have to do math here. 275 divided by 25 is 11, right? So right now we have up to 275 million that we can allocate directly to the workers of small businesses who qualify right now, right?
Correct. Right now, I would say technically only 25 is being unlocked via this executive order. Mm-hmm. So there's 250 left over that's going to be able to be drawn down on. So they could, in theory, come back 10 separate times in 25 million and request additional aid in $25 million increments.
Does this bill allow for us to, without an additional statutory permission, to go above the 275, or are we capped with this bill at 275 for the income purposes? For the
purposes of the support programs, the workforce and business support programs, I believe the budget amendment capped that in the budget in the conference committee report at 275.
Okay, so so 275 at the moment for the individuals and the small businesses. And it's probably fair to say that that's going to get spent, right? I mean, even if at $25 million increments over a period of time, I mean, we can just count on that being spent.
I couldn't say. I don't know how, I guess it's just going to be given, like I said, given the unprecedented you know, that this is an unprecedented event. I wouldn't wanna, you know, I'd be negligent if I tried to say how much was gonna be spent when it was.
Okay, and then moving on to the bridge, so the bill obviously raises the bond limit $1 billion, right?
Correct.
And I'm assuming the purpose of that is so that without having to wait for the dysfunction of the federal government, we can get started on building the bridge quickly.
Give some capacity to go ahead and move fast if necessary, correct?
So it's fair to say that money's gonna get spent too. I mean, obviously.
Depending on what comes down from the federal government and happens in the future, you know, I can't necessarily comment, but some of the flexibility is there.
Okay, and then I think that's all I had on those two parts. I'm sure others will have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Jackson?
Mr. Chair, Matt, is there any language in this bill that deals with independent contractors or folks who are retired but were still working at the port?
I think the programs generally would apply to just, that's what it's kind of geared towards, is those independent contractors generally.
And
So that's,
then the retirees, it's like the work share program. It's like,
anybody who was working at the port as a kind of an income could be
correct.
Oh, okay,
affected,
Thank
fall under this.
thank you.
Delegate Weibel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions, many of them may be detailed, but just feel need to ask them. The rainy day funds, what's the balance in the rainy day fund now?
1% of,
Billions,
yeah, it's 1% of.
billions right now.
275 million was 1% of the rainy day fund.
Okay, so the 275,
That's
that's
1% of the rainy day fund.
that's not in this bill. That's in the budget bill that was passed.
Yeah, so I
Correct.
believe the budget left the rainy day fund at about 8.5%. The drawdown, if it's used all up, would take the rainy day fund to about 7.5%. What I seem to
Yeah.
remember during this conversation, but yeah, it's the 275 million is about 1%.
Okay. The term temporary relief program, so the term temporary relief was removed. Other than the scholarship fund, aren't all of these don't they remain temporary?
Which reference are you
What page
referring
you on?
to?
On the very first page of the purpose amendment, it says you've scratched through temporary relief and just left the term program. So what other programs are remaining other than the
Well, the
scholarship?
scholarship program. That's why, since this bill included that and the scholarship program, you can't call them temporary relief programs. They're just programs.
So all the rest of them remain temporary?
Yeah,
The fund, so the way is exactly, so the programs don't technically like go off the book per se. They just stop being funded, right? So essentially making the programs moot. As the chair said, the scholarship program though stays in perpetuity now. And there's also the work share requirement that goes past the thing. So there are a couple pieces in this bill that necessitate kind of leaving it just on the books.
Okay. And I know questions have been asked about the scholarship fund, but what is significant about the January 1, 2022 date? I mean, we're all aware of the 695 accident
would
last
capture
year.
that.
Are we trying to pull something else in?
No, so the way it was drafted is it was open-ended on front end and the back end, right? So it could go all the way back to the 60s, 70s. It could go all the way back forever, essentially. So the idea was to put some time frame on it so that there was some understanding of, you know, the universe of individuals that were.
So there's
talking about.
nothing significant about that date.
not
No,
to
there
my
is
knowledge.
not.
Yeah.
And does it include law enforcement, or is this just
If long, I think it includes workers, transportation workers.
It's fallen transportation workers.
Correct.
when we're not considering law enforcement transportation work?
No, we're not.
Okay. Chairman, I thought I heard you say that it was for Maryland schools only, but on
It
page
was, and I apologize. I was gonna rescind that because the theory was if you have an individual whose family was killed or a family member was killed, a sporting family member was killed, and they get into Harvard, we would like to be able to help them, you know, at Harvard. So it limits it to Maryland schools,
So the idea is that if you do get someone into Harvard or the child of the decedent is out of state, they could still get that, but it's capped at like USM institution levels.
Yeah,
So it's
so I
like if you're gonna
apologize,
receive
yeah.
in-state institution, but that's the individual supplement,
Yeah,
so
the
that it
Maryland-
can't go above. a
Yeah, it's the
certain
Maryland
level.
equivalent. Apologize about that.
Okay. And, you know, this may be immaterial, but you have at least 16 years old. I mean, we've actually had kids in our community colleges as low as 13 years old. Why is there a 16-year-old requirement on there?
Kind of just thought that was the reasonable age if you expect someone to go to college at a very low end. There are anomalies, but for the most part, 16 is pretty young going to college.
Okay. On page 12, just a little concerned about the language. It says revenue bonds may be issued by the authority without obtaining the consent of any instrumentality, agency, or unit of the state. Is that common practice now?
That for the transportation authority, being that is an kind of an independent arm of state government, yes. You would want, this is existing law that gives kind of the transportation authority the ability to kind of operate outside of, in an independent fashion. And bond rating agencies like Moody's and whatnot like to see that, because they know that the transportation authority is going to act in the best interest of its bondholders. So that's sort of there to say there's no extra step that the authority has to go through in order to protect those assets of the authority.
All right. And then just my last question for now, what accountability is built into this then?
As far, when you say accountability, you mean oversight? You
Yeah,
mean-
well, who's auditing the dispersion of the funds and
Well,
all that?
And to my understanding, this is one of my biggest issues. So it's not only the Department of Labor being expected to set up these programs, they're gonna be reporting back to the legislative, what's it called again?
Policy committee.
Policy Committee, which is senators and delegates, to tell us what programs they have, what their oversight is, and I think most of the chairs, are we all on that?
Yes.
Yeah, and we can always
the
call-
minority party leadership.
But
of the
that's
minority
that's
party.
more of a broader, I mean, I'm thinking about an actual audit. If a $500,000 goes out to some company or organization, how do we know they're not, you know, also receiving federal funds and receiving state funds? I'm assuming that language is in the bill. I know we had asked for it.
Correct.
That you couldn't double up and receive funds from.
That is
different-
contemplated under the bill to be built into kind of these agreements that are going out, that labor and commerce.
But
are
there's
doing.
nothing in the bill that requires that to be in the language of the.
We actually, but
contract.
we put it the language that you couldn't double dip.
Yeah.
So the Department of Labor and Commerce have to,
All
that's
right.
part of the law. They have to follow the law and they have to apply the law.
Okay, so then who is following through to make sure that doesn't? happen?
We are.
Who's we?
Well, the Legislative Policy Committee can, and also I would believe that the departments in consultation with the comptroller's office would advise on whether or not there's a claim for any sort of clawback.
Which is why we had the opening, giving tax, sharing tax information, making sure that was in there. So comptroller could always see, because that's their job for all of us, right? To make sure we're properly reporting our taxes. They're going to be doing doubly so and to make sure that they're verifying where they're getting their money from.
So the comptroller's office is being tasked with that
Well,
responsibility. in this bill.
that's the nature of their job involving in this. That's why we had to give them authority to exchange tax information, because they're going to be ones giving this information to the Department of Labor and Department of Commerce.
Okay. And then, does it require the application of federal funds for, because again, we heard President
does.
Biden saying that he's in this for 100%. Does anything in the bill require use of federal funding first?
Yes, it is specific that federal funds have to be used before state funds.
Yep.
In every instance.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Delegate Fisher.
Thank you. This is actually really helpful to go over this bill, so I appreciate it. At the bottom of page 10, line 5, article transportation. In this title, the following words have the meanings indicated. Transportation facility includes any one or more of the following combination of, and it lists them and then goes on the page 11. Transportation facility project includes, and it just lists a bunch of other bridges, the Susquehanna River Bridge, the Harry Nice, Mac Middleton Bridge. Is there a reason why those were added?
That's the way that this is existing statute, and this
Okay.
is how we kind of delineate in statute which ones we're trying to push.
And
I
one is just
suppose,
very
right?
broad. If you
So
look,
it's,
the first part is very broad, just talk about all airports. And then they go in with some again, some specificity in the second part, but that's been language.
Just looks like they're adding,
No,
a
because
lot of
these are not, this is not new language or anything. This is already on the books language, and it's just shown, the only reason it's there is for drafting conventions to
Okay.
show that provision. So you can see on page 12 what the $4 billion bond raise could potentially apply to.
Okay.
But in this instance, we know it's
How about line 23 on page 11, a vehicle parking facility located in a priority funding area is defined in the article.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't,
that's literally
I
all
don't know
old
about
language,
that one.
bud.
yeah.
And any other project for transportation facilities that the authority authorizes to be acquired or constructed?
I believe just a catch-all for existing language.
That's existing language?
All this,
That's all
anything,
this is
anything that's
existing.
not emboldened, underlined, or italicized is existing language.
Got it.
Yes, sir. 3101, 4101.
It's just that it's underlined and that's,
Wait.
That's
Apologize.
because we had to add it afterwards. So what the Senate did is that afterwards, the administration came in and said, MDTA needs to have their bond cap raised. So this wasn't in the bill as introduced when it was over in the Senate. So
Oh.
this is existing language that was dropped in
For
order to
context.
amend, for context, in order to amend the $4 billion number on page 12.
But it is existing language.
it's just that any other project for transportation facilities that the authority authorizes to be acquired or constructed
Yes,
seems awfully broad for this particular bill since.
but it's not this bill. This is existing language. We're just showing context
I got
of
it.
how it fits in. I get your point, but just showing context.
All right, thank you.
All right, going back to Delegate Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just three quick questions, hopefully. You mentioned the lower income workers, and I'm sure it's in this bill. I tried to flip back through. What are the income limits?
There are none.
There's none.
No, this is a presumption as far as the pay people who work in the transportation in these industries usually make.
Okay. So just legally, so this is, it says natural disaster. So what happens if we have a hurricane or something like that? What is,
What page you on?
I don't know, somewhere it said natural
Does this
disaster,
have, oh, so this have to do with the scholarship fund?
just in general. So I guess what I'm wondering is unintended consequences. So is this broad enough so that if we had a hurricane later this year and we have, a lot of deaths or things that occur, what does that open us up to under this bill, or does it not?
I believe that the intent of the bill is clear because the actual on page 8, line 9. And I know that this is in another section of the bill, but in here, we're referencing the state of emergency for the port in here. Plus, all the money runs out at the end of the fiscal year, right?
But
So
were you focusing on the scholarship wording or,
No,
Oh, the-
just in general.
oh yeah, it defines it very
Both.
clearly.
yeah, I
Okay.
believe, the governor would then in theory come back if there was another emergency, do another state of emergency that doesn't just apply because the EOs that have been issued thus far are very narrowly
Are just
tailored to
spec-
port.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay, and then on the scholarships, is this for, I know you said there was an age of 16. Is there an age cap? So,
There is not because of
There's not.
surviving spouses may also take advantage
Correct.
of this.
if they now have to go to attend college in order because their spouse has passed to, increase their income.
was there any discussion of, okay, so there's, adult children that maybe say, well, now I'm gonna go get a graduate degree, or is it undergrad only, or can they just come back and,
Nope, they've got, it's, I think 5 years or 8 years, right? Say again?
Undergraduates included. And
Undergrad and graduates are included.
okay, so no limit at all?
But the limit is tied to in-state and public institution, USM.
Okay, thank you.
So you can't go outside to a much higher and get.
Well, we
that.
said we
You
were
only
gonna
You
pay for
can,
them to go to
But
Harvard.
you can, but it's the amount that you get is the amount that would be equal to the
Yeah.
in-state or the tuition you go to University of Maryland school. So you
Right.
can't go, I apologize.
The
I say that
cash.
because we had it one way and then we got an idea that we should let people who may get in Harvard go to Harvard. and help them out because their families are deceased. So that's why we allowed that in. That's why I keep missing it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Delegate Weibel.
Last question. The MDTA bonding authority, does that remain then at 4 billion or is that a temporary increase or it remains there?
There's no sunset on that. We couldn't sunset it because the bonds are gonna be outstanding for years to come. So
It just increases it because of this new emergency that we know we have to get kick started. Can't wait for the feds. So, well, we had to increase it for that.
So I assume the bonds are callable. So if the feds give us the money, there's no reason potentially for that to remain at an extra $1 billion.
I mean, I assume that I don't know how MDTA would work it. I mean, you can retire bonds. I mean, you can do whatever. I don't know how it would work. It would just depend on timing and amounts and everything else. But, you know, I'm not sure how they would, you know, factor in that federal supplement and what strings would be attached to that federal supplement. It's just kind of to be decided.
So how much is outstanding with their bonds right now? I know they have a $3 billion cap, but where are they at?
I know they're over $2 billion. I can't remember the exact number. It's 2223, somewhere in there.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Aaron's.
Pieces I would have bring up on the scholarships, Matt. Is this starting to moving forward or can we go back?
We can only go back to January 1st, 2022, but it's forward in perpetuity.
Okay. The other thing that had me a little bit confused here, you keep talking about in perpetuity and you talked about that with the scholarship and I get that, but the fund goes for, you said everything else is forever.
Wait, no, the bonding.
The bonding
the
is
fund, the funds, they come back, this is what, June of 26.
Since we're working in a limited budget, the funding ends explicitly at the end of this upcoming fiscal year. So
25.
June 30th, 2025.
Okay, a couple things. You know, where there's a lot of talk right now that the port will be open, at least the channel will be open by the end of May, fully open by the end of May. And the question I have is, there is no drop dead, I shouldn't say it, stop date on this. There is no stop date on this process and this program.
There is
When is it?
June 2025.
No, that's the funding. But
Yes.
the bill also talks until the port is up to speed,
Gotcha.
so we're back to
Back to
100%.
the reduced operations.
Reduced operations. And I think it's important we find something that actually works for the word reduced because this indicates that you did also talk about bonding the bridge. And I believe, in my opinion, that bridge is paramount to us opening up at full speed. And I don't know that the taxpayer should be on this till that bridge is rebuilt.
Remember that regardless, we can't obligate further, funding for the next year's budget. So it ends because of that. Budgetary language caused this in. Let's say the programs are still in existence this time next year for whatever reason. They have to come back through this body to explain why these programs exist and why they need additional monies from our rainy day funds.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, but typically we don't win bills in this General Assembly, that many bills on budget and what have you. And I worry about this sitting back saying next year we're going to do it again and the year after that.
I hope that you do understand with my line of questioning that so do we. Because this isn't, we don't get to print money. Well, I say we, I know I do. That's why my question was at that line, trying to make sure we put as many guardrails into this. We found out after we did all these hearings that the governor had his executive order come out. We still move forward to make sure that we are comfortable with the guardrails. I have no doubt what you're saying. I know that, and I've learned this, that, a lot of things are started and ended solely on budgetary language. So while whatever the administration says, we want this program to go 2 or 3 years, it's now kind of incumbent upon us to provide those guardrails. So your point is about putting a drop dead certain date. The best way we could do that is through the budgetary language of June 2025.
And I understand. It's just maybe I'm thinking on the wrong end of this. I think there needs to be a number out there. If we're at 70% of capacity, I don't think the port's going to come back to 100% of capacity for decades.
I certainly see your point, Delegate. The committee looked at and staff looked at like the MFRs and other statistics for the port. There are just a lot of things to sift through. And then we said, well, if 75%, 80%, well, what if one thing comes back in abundance, but something else doesn't,
Right.
meaning someone is still out of work, even though that might
Right.
factor into the percentage.
And
And it just got so
it's
weighty
it's
that
like
it-
VW is, not at all able to come back in because their boats are too deep or too, whatever, they're too big. Then even if they're 15%, it's still not over. We tried this, we ran through these, programs like, was it 75, 85%? But if this very large employer still can't get up to operation because we haven't, dug it out deep enough, and they're only the 15%, do we want the program to end for their workers? And the answer was no.
Well, I get that, but what if we have some major boom where somebody comes back in and says that Mayor's come back here at 100%?
But that's why we'll be having these meetings, we'll be having the reports and meetings.
The people that are still out there that are not up to speed because of this action, they're still hurting. And maybe the port's up to what we consider 100%.
Oh, so you're more concerned with.
No, I'm
people
not
being-
more concerned.
I'm sorry, you're also concerned with, for some other reason, we grow to be 100%, but there are people still out of work.
Correct. Maybe it's too much to ask, but.
I mean, that's a hard one. I get your point. It was hard. It was definitely not a silver bullet, buddy. We just do the best for our ability. Okay, guys, we got to wrap this up. We have 10 minutes. We still have some bills to vote on, but sorry. Well, you guys have are they really deep questions? Go ahead, Wyville, real quick, bud.
There's the bill read. It was introduced and read the first time on March 4th.
that was an initial, we got a lot of those calls too in the office. We got an initializing error just in the system. It just tagged it as the wrong
But
date.
it's heavily amended. You have time to correct that. Why don't we correct the date?
What's that?
Then why don't we correct the date?
You mean on the website?
No, it's right here on the bill. It still says March 14th. Why wouldn't you correct?
Oh,
it?
sorry. What are we saying here?
The introduced and first time read?
It says March 14th. Yeah, right at the top.
That's not. Is that legislative day?
So there is an issue. We cannot fix it. There was an issue with how the bill was put in the system. When the bill came in the system, we got a lot of calls saying, what did you know? And there was nothing. It came in the system and just popped up as a wrong date. So it printed here as a wrong date.
And you're asking why we didn't amend the date out? But because it's still in the system. This is a systemic issue. It's not something we can or can't amend.
Yeah.
Delegate Turner.
Thank you. Just a little small question to you. Okay, I think you might have said it, but it went across my head. Okay, how we guarantee, are you making them guarantee something in writing that if we do all this help them get through this crucial time, that they will come back to us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, is it
Pages
in
13,
writing?
pages 13 and
13.
15. On page 13, lines 22 and 23 and down there. And on page 15, lines 4 and 5. They're committed to continuing operations to the full extent practical, and at the port once it resumes full operations. Similarly, that same language is on the other side of it too. So
Yes, so we have twice.
that's gonna be something that they're gonna have to agree to in order to even receive it.
That's what I'm.
And if they don't come back, that's
Okay.
where the clawback comes.
Thank you. Doug. Is yours important, Pippi? I want to be this guy, but we got to get going. Is this something you want to ask?
Just 5 seconds. It was just, how come we didn't tie it to just when the port is open to the same capacity as it is now? Like, we can't
Because
control whether
the
businesses
worry
come back.
the worry was, it may never be at that capacity. And this would go on infinitum. And actually, this was a Steve Aronson amendment. Because that was the whole point, because his concern was, well, if it's never open, do we just keep paying people until, and say, no, don't worry, hold out.
No. What I mean is, why isn't all this just tied to when they clear the bridge, but that's fall?
Because it still takes time. After that, you still might have to do some trudging. It still takes business a while to start sending their boats back through that
I
harbor,
understand.
making sure it's all open. So we didn't know how long that would take.
Right. I understand.
Because statistics shift looking back at what we're looking at as far as what's coming out of the port. And it was hard to be like, what is the baseline? Because, it shifts. It's a moving target.
Good. All right, again, there was a motion to move the amendments. Is there a second? All in favor of the amendments moving forward, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Hearing none. Do we have a motion? On the bill as amended, there's a motion to move and properly seconded. We'll go down. Chair votes yes. Delegate Crosby is excused. Delegate Harrison. Delegate Boafo. Delegate Howard. Delegate Charkoudian. Delegate Rose. Delegate Pruski. Delegate Fennell. Delegate Turner. Delegate Valderrama. Delegate Chi. Delegate Frazier Hidalgo. Delegate Adams. Delegate Aaron's. Delegate Pippy. Delegate Jackson. Delegate Johnson. Delegate Rogers. Delegate Amprey. Delegate Weibel. Gotcha. Delegate Fisher? To which part? I got you. Delegate, I got you. Yeah, I understand it's a lot. I understand it's not. You guys did say no, right? Wait, son of a weasel. Wrong. And this is also the Senate bill, the vote on the Senate bill for 1188. Wait, the House bill 11? Yeah. Yes.
On the House bill, but applies.
Senate bill 1188. All right, brief indulgence. Motherfucker. Who's this? Brief indulgence. Wrong sheet was in front of me, so apologize. All right, next bill, please. Next bill, please. I apologize.
Senate Bill 456 is identical to Delegate Atterbury's House 808 on Uber delivery, not Uber, DoorDash delivery of liquor. There's a technical amendment because they have a cross-reference wrong. So move the amendment. Oh, you need the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. On the bill as amended. Thank you. Is there anybody opposed to this bill? On the bill as amended, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, all present voted in favor with Delegate Queen and Delegate Crosby being excused. Chair votes yes. Next bill, please.
Senate Bill 783, Senator Elfrith. This is the Brighter Future Tomorrow Act. There are amendments in your packet that essentially do three things. They add Delegate Chi's customer cited solar program to it. They add a requirement to have local governments use the NREL program for siting solar under certain circumstances. And they also strike prevailing wage limitation on using a LPO, LPA,
Project Labor.
PLA. I'm sorry, it's been too long. Thank you. From the solar installations, and also clarified that existing law on underground utility projects also apply only prospectively. That's the prevailing wage provisions.
Brief indulgence.
Yeah.
Want to make sure that the PLA is taken care of.
No, this is something that was on a bill that was in the end. And it's there are amendments.
On the amendments, any discussion? Hearing none. On the amendments, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? The bill is amended. I'll go down and do a roll call. Chair votes yes. Vice Chair is excused. Delegate Harrison, Delegate Waffo, Delegate Howard, Delegate Charkoudian, Delegate Rose, Delegate Pruski, Delegate Fennell, Delegate Turner, Delegate Valderrama, Delegate Chi, Delegate Frazier Dago, Delegate Adams, Delegate Aaron's, Delegate Pippy, Delegate Jackson, Delegate Johnson, Delegate Rogers, Delegate Amprey, Delegate Weibel, Delegate Fisher, Delegate Queen is excused. All right, colleagues, we will probably be coming off the floor to vote again. Thank you, everybody. Concurrence come by, we'll let you know.